Hello and welcome to another episode, Season 5, Episode 9 of The Green Agenda. First and foremost, per usual, we'd like to give a big shout out and thank you to our partners and sponsors, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Climate Action Campaign. My name is Kayla Shannon, your host, and tonight's episode will focus on protecting our lungs, the fight against methane pollution. Today, we are going to discuss the hidden dangers of methane pollution and its direct impact on public health and Black and Latino communities with the phenomenal, Meisei Gonzalez, who is from the Climate Justice and Clean Air Program and a clean air program advocate for Green Latinos. Let's get into it. All right. Before we get started, Meisei, can you just share a little bit about your journey and what brought you into environmental justice?
Yeah, definitely. I love that you guys asked this question because it made me sit down and reflect.
Actually, how did I get here?
Yeah, because it just kind of happens. And I've been in this for, I think, 5 years now. So it was really cool to just sit down and be like, where did it all start? Mm-hmm. And I think a little good background is kind of where my family's from. So I'm a proud son of migrant parents. My parents migrated here from Mexico in 1998. And I grew up primarily, we were talking a little about this, in Salt Lake City, Utah, on the west side of Salt Lake City and some cities that surround the area, so West Valley City as well as Kearns. And my neighborhoods were beautifully diverse and cultural, which is not really reflective of the rest of the state. Yes. So grew up in really pretty bubble, but when I started growing up, I started seeing some disparities in my bubble. So I started seeing we don't have the best parks. Oh, we don't have the green spaces, but we do have the highways, we have the landfills, and we have a lot of just a polluting industry on our side. Mm-hmm. So I think seeing that contrast between my neighborhoods and some neighborhoods that I started to see on the other side, like these gated neighborhoods, these more affluent neighborhoods, really made me question what that was. So I then later went into college, which I'm going to gas myself up for a second because being the first born here, there's lots of firsts. I was able to be the first to even make it to high school, which was crazy. I graduated high school with my associate's degree, which was huge. I was a nerd. And then went to the University of Utah for my bachelor's.
Yes.
And in my programming, one of my classes, so I'm a comms major, was to go to a nonprofit and help them with their communications, which any nonprofit who gets someone who's hey, I'm here to help for free, they jump on that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Now I know that, being in the nonprofit space. So jumped in, and it was a Latino-led nonprofit that worked on immigration. So here's where some of those intersections started coming in. I worked with their cancer survivor group, and they kept talking about just the cancer they were living with, and then they showed where they lived, and I was these are my neighborhoods. You guys are close to the highways, you guys are close to where I grew up. So I started linking those two together, and I think that's when I first saw what I didn't know at the time was environmental justice. I just thought it was environmentalism. I didn't know that looking at the disparities was sometimes seen as separate from the full fight. And with that, I then went into an environmental policy nonprofit called Heal Utah. And that's when I did their comms first, but I was really, really nosy. And I loved seeing what the policy people were doing. So that's when I started kind of dipping my toes into it.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I was I'm going to start showing up to these committee hearings. There's a lawmaker in front of me. Of course, I'm going to voice.
You're going to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to say
Absolutely.
something. So I was able to lead some campaigns there. The one I'm really proud of was we helped stop the highway expansion in my neighborhood. So they're trying to expand a highway, spend $3 billion on it when we don't have parks, we don't have resources for our community. We were able to stop that. And I think that was my first taste in okay, we can do something with collective power. So that's kind of the little journey I went on to. And then Green Latinos loved the work that they were doing, loved seeing a Brown-led organization. Utah, Heal Utah, love you guys. But it wasn't a Green Latinos, right? So being able to work with them on a volunteer basis, and I just kept my eye out until something opened up.
Till something popped up, yes.
And now been working with them for over a year, leading their climate justice and clean air. So
that's so cool.
It's a little bit of my journey. It was fun to reflect on that, I'm not going to lie. Yesterday's where did it all go?
Yes, and I love that because so often when we meet with our guests and we ask them this question, sort of what brought you to this work, a common thread that sticks out to me is that it's so often interconnected with their your lived experiences, right? Like where you came from, who you were raised by, how you were raised, kind of the spirit of your community. And, you know, there's definitely a through line for there with you. And I can appreciate that, you know, the journey of starting and the exposure to something that gave you intrigue, and then the opportunity to delve just a little bit deeper and slowly find your way along a path, like not to just a simple final destination, but to like a greater work and a greater landscape that to journey through. So super exciting. Thank you for sharing.
It was fun. I definitely didn't like one day be like, I'm gonna be an environmental justice advocate. Like
it was like
it just kind of
stops along the way that led you here. That's amazing. So the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, has recently proposed extending the compliance deadlines for its Methane Rule 111. Can you explain to our audience what the Methane Rule 111 is and how this extension will affect Black, Indigenous, and Latino communities that are disproportionately impacted by methane pollution?
Yeah, definitely. So let's start with the basics, what methane is. So
I love to start there, the basics.
Methane is a colorless, odorless gas that is emitted. It's a main component of natural gas, and I'm saying that with quotation marks right now because it's not a natural gas, it's a fossil fuel gas. This is usually overshadowed by carbon dioxide in a lot of climate discussions, but it's actually way more dangerous than carbon dioxide. In the short term, specifically over 20 years, methane traps more than 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide.
Wow.
And it's responsible for a quarter of the warming that we're already facing. And with this, it doesn't come alone. It comes with, when it leaks from flaring or different ways, it comes with volatile organic compounds, benzenes, and other toxins. So it's a big issue. And that's just a little bit about what methane is itself. And now talking about the Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, its technical name, but what we call as that methane rule is they finally designed a rule where they were able to put some standards on this pollution from oil and gas operations. The rules required them to use readily available technologies to fix leaks, stop dangerous venting and flaring, and then just reduce emissions across the board. This was honestly a game changer. A lot of organizations advocated for this. Lots of public comments came in support, and we wanted something stronger, of course, but this was a good first step. So now what's happening is industry-backed politicians try to fully repeal this rule. And I think that's really important context, because what ended up happening is they weren't successful with that full repeal. What they got was a delay. So they pushed forward a delay, and this delay is just another way of denying communities the protections that they need, right? So every year that we have these delays means more pollution, more asthma attacks, more preventable deaths that we are going to be seeing. And this part, I'm always trying to remind people this. If history has told us anything, one short delay, that we know
it
that
delays.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's gonna
it continues to delay
into more delays. And if their original intent was to repeal, that's why I think it's so important to remind people that they wanted it gone fully. That's just a strategy for them. Delay until we can't, until we can actually repeal it. So another piece I really want to highlight, this part irks me so much. So the EPA used what's called an interim final rule to put this delay into effect. And they didn't allow the public to comment on this before saying the rule was final. So delay is already out, and the comment period, though, is still happening right now. So, yeah.
So it's like you made a decision, but now it's like, any opinions, any thoughts? It's
their way of saying, like, we listened, but it's performative. And in my comments earlier this month in September, we called that out. Like, you didn't allow the public to participate in this. And that's really, it's alarming for a lot of environmental justice organizations because it kind of attacks a lot of the democracy in our public comment periods, right? Because democracy is environmental justice. It's allowing people to voice their concerns, to voice what issues are happening, and them stripping away really signals we're not listening to the community. We're doing what we want to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm curious, especially considering how the process that went into the initial development of this rule. I'm curious about, like, so what does this delay mean for the continued advocacy of these limitations and restrictions that are necessary to bring about change in these communities?
Yeah, the process of getting this push forward was like an all hands on deck, right? We had lots of different organizations, community leaders coming forward, and now it's just it pulls in this political game, because we know that when different administrations come, changes happen, right? And that's what we saw with this administration. They came in, they brought their people, they're delaying everything. Let's say we switch it next time. We're going to bring in our people, start the process of getting it forward. Yeah, it's really frustrating because we're not getting any progress done either way.
Yeah.
So it's really frustrating to see that constant back and forth game, especially when lives are at stake. I think part of the question was like, what does this mean for our communities? For Black and Indigenous communities, we're the ones who live closest to the wells. We're the ones living closest to these compressor stations and refineries. And a study found that over 10 million people in the U.S., including 1.6 million Latinos and nearly 1 million Black people, live within half a mile of oil and gas operations. So while they're playing back and forth,
delaying,
our communities are suffering from it. And this happens a lot with health. So one study shows that Latino children are twice as likely than white children to die from asthma attacks, partially from disproportionate exposure to this, but also lack of like healthcare and access, right? Or being far from a hospital. I know the neighborhood I grew up with, I think it was like a 40-minute drive to our hospital.
Oh, wow.
Having an asthma attack, 40-minute drive, you can add it up.
Yeah.
And in Indigenous communities in places like New Mexico are surrounded by oil and gas development and face way higher rates of asthma, cancer, and also mental health challenges of just having to live in environments like that. So again, they're back and forth while communities are really feeling the impacts.
Yeah, and you touched on beautifully, I think, the interconnectedness, right? Like the public health perspective, that it's not only just the exposure and then the health conditions that follow, it's also the lack of access to health care, and it's also from there the stressors that then cause greater barriers and obstacles in mental health that are then hard to address because of access to healthcare and stigmas within communities. So all of there's a domino effect, right, that pile up in the way of these communities that are most closely positioned to these struggles. I'm wondering in building off of that, as you said, the methane pollution is often overshadowed by carbon emissions and climate discussions, but the dangers of methane are equally powerful. How else do these pollutions and the impacts of these pollutions intersect with other things like we talked about, not only access to healthcare, but also economic stability and education, especially in communities of color?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of touched on the healthcare piece of it where, there's lots of lack of access to healthcare, health resources. And with not only this rollback, but we saw with the big, I don't want to say beautiful, big ugly bill that passed.
that big fat bill.
Yeah, that bill. They stripped away a lot of like Medicaid and a lot of just resources for healthcare.
The infrastructure that we had.
So they're stripping like not only the infrastructure we need for medical resources, but now making what's getting us sick even worse. So we're getting those two kind of combining together in the healthcare piece. And then economically speaking, one study that was really interesting for me, there's a national study that found oil and gas pollution contributed to 7,500 premature deaths and added 77 billion in healthcare costs for a single year. So that's families getting into medical debt, missed wages from having to go to like an ER or having to stay the night from some sort of issue. And that means also like the choice between paying medical bills and keeping a roof over your head, right?
Like keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
Having groceries in the refrigerator.
And a big thing when that kept coming up, like I've even heard some people who are like, well, why don't people just move out of their neighborhood? That is just not the reality.
It sounds real simple.
Yeah,
like, why don't we just end world hunger?
And it's frustrating, and something on a flag that I witnessed like firsthand. Last month, I was able to spend a week in a cancer alley in Louisiana and got to really talk with a lot of community members who were able to finally like buy homes. Like they were able to scrap money together to buy a home, and then industry moved in. So in a lot of cases, like these communities were already there, and industry just chose these areas to kind of come with.
And why should they have to give up their homes, be displaced, start over, scrape up the money to be able to buy another home in a different neighborhood where they will then bring industry?
Yep. Exactly.
Like it's a recurring
it's
issue.
Like, that is, I know for my family, like our home is one of those few things we were able to like own. So like it's not only just like, oh, I want to like just move. Like that is your home. Like that is where memories were made. That is where so much
community, the village, the culture, the sense of pride in place based. Like this we built this. Like this is our home. Absolutely.
So for people saying just move, that's not a reality.
Yeah.
And also with the markets right now, the people who are going to buy these homes are most likely oil and gas. So we were talking to residents in Louisiana. They were saying, yeah, oil and gas is offered to pay for our home way lower than what it's worth. How am I going to buy a home now we know how housing is right now? How are we supposed to
That's even comparable.
So that's one piece with the economic part that I really wanted to highlight.
Can I pause you there? Yeah. Because I just think that is so what you just spoke about as it relates to the economic impact of these health disparities is so incredibly important, because one of the major sort of justifications that we hear these big industries offer is that like it's for our economy. Like it deeply benefits, these oil and fossil fuel companies are like, this is literally the foundation of our entire economy. And if we no longer exist, then we make no profit, and the revenue in our entire government will collapse, and all these things. But you have just spoken to statistical evidence, right? That these same powerhouses, so to speak, have caused disproportionate financial and economic burdens on American citizens, right? And so what is the trade-off, right? That yes, we bring in from oil and gas and fossil fuel industries or other big industries, we bring in this amount of revenue at the cost of this amount of revenue on marginalized communities, right? It's almost a direct trade-off, and obviously with greater burden on the life, the quality of life in these communities.
Yeah, it's like, whose economy are they about?
Exactly. What economy? Yeah.
Whose third yacht are they really fighting right now?
Exactly. Okay, and then on that last point, on education.
Yeah, so education, like we've known methane to be robbing a lot of young people of opportunity. There's research that links oil and gas pollution to increased risks of developmental disorders and impaired fetal growth. And so we have kids who are growing up sick, fatigued, missing school because of toxic air or just the exposure to methane. And that's, again, very overburdened for communities of color. As I mentioned, kind of in my growing up, a lot of communities of color don't have the best resources for schooling, and they're closer to a lot of different issues. In my own experience, they bust me out to whiter neighborhoods to go to school. Yeah, just because of the lack of resourcing. So that just speaks volumes of the schools are under-resourced with just being able to provide for the children, and then now closer proximity to a lot of these high polluting sources. So it's a horrible kind of domino and mixture of all of these issues.
Yes, they absolutely pile one on top of another. And in consideration of that, right, so you have supported us to, like, set a foundation and a clarity about, like, okay, what is methane? Mm-hmm. How is it disproportionately impacting marginalized communities that exist in the margins of American society? And then also, like, what is the fallout from a public health perspective, right? Beyond that, right, and understanding that, like, methane emissions are not a really sexy topic. Like, It's not like, ooh, this is a great dinner conversation. Let's get into methane emissions and their implications for our country, right? Especially for many youth and young adults, right? The youngest demographic, which is also the those with the least, the lowest voting bracket, right, in America, and sometimes considered, although I personally beg to differ, like, the most disillusioned. Especially in today's society, to politics and to just the political climate, right? How can we better support youth to learn and effectively communicate about the risks and consequences of methane pollution? And, like, what role do you believe, especially because you're a comms major, so this is like, this is your area of expertise, okay? What role can storytelling, media, and art play in raising awareness and mobilizing action, like real change on this issue?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to first start with, like, I don't think for youth is if it's exciting or not. I think, as you mentioned, there's just so much on our non-youth's plate, right? We have what's going on right now politically, and trying to keep up with everything, it's a lot. And I think when you hear about methane, it sounds very technical. And I think that's where there's that disconnect where it's like,
okay, yes.
Like, but so bringing it to that storytelling and kind of connecting it to these other issues, I think is the biggest bridge to help with that.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about the health impacts, asthma, these are more tangible things. Like, yeah, there are health issues related to climate change. I think that can really lead people into it. So it kind of takes it away from being so technical. I also think that we need some more intergenerational guidance in this space.
Yes, intergenerational is my favorite word.
We can't afford to keep reinventing this wheel. And I don't think we should do that.
Yeah.
So when youth comes in, I really do think it should be like with the elders, with those who have been in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
I know for me, learning about methane, it wasn't just I opened up a textbook and let's learn about this. It was, Mark Magana, our CEO, talking about methane and how he's been leading the fight on that for years. So I really think we need those spaces. And also, once we get those spaces with the intergenerational wisdom, giving youth the opportunity to communicate that to our generation in the way that we do, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's a TikTok. I don't think it's 6 seconds. I actually think, and I've been looking into this a little more of our youth is starting to step away from social media. More of us are starting to want more than these 6 seconds.
Depth.
Yeah, we want depth. We want more connection. We want more just time to actually dive into something. And I've seen this not only in my friend group, but just in a lot of our generation. We're just tired of how quick things are going. So I think there's a real craving for that deeper understanding of things. And I think storytelling and media and art come in to do that bridge. It makes it less abstract, really tangible, and even through digital storytelling, like that piece is a great way to like kind of start a lot of it. So I think those are some big pieces.
Yeah.
And again, reflecting on that trip I had in Louisiana, I got to sit down with like leaders who have been working on this for years and years and just sit and listen. And I think that was really important for me to see and important for me to be in that space. And I know not everyone can like replicate something like that, but just creating some sort of space that it's slowed down, I think would be great. Not the Zoom call is done. Go.
Yes. I think you touched on so many great things, and I'm going to do my best not to start my TED Talk. But like intergenerational development is something that like hits so close to home for me as a young person that was introduced to social justice work from a young age. It's like basically most of the jobs that I've ever done have been in the area of social justice, and I sometimes joke that like anything social justice related, I don't care like which part we're touching, that is like I am overjoyed by the opportunity to fight this beast, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what's so incredibly, several things that you said were so incredibly important, but the greater context, right, that it is not that youth don't care, right, or that we are unaware or that we don't recognize. A part of it is a desensitization due to the overwhelming climate of constant struggle.
Yep.
Right? Like, you think this is the generation that, and it's not that like struggle is new, because struggle is something that has been happening in this nation, particularly in marginalized community, since the foundation and the inception of this nation, right? So it's not that the fact of struggle is new. It is the constant exposure and access to ongoing like media, social media, TikToks, and the shortening of everything, and the polarization of everything, the radicalization of everything, right? That everything is a major issue, right? And everything is like life stopping, life changing. And when you grow up in the digital age, like I have never known a time when like computers didn't exist.
Yeah.
Not like, knowledge. I don't know when computers were like created, but like as long as I've been alive, like we have had some type of access to digital media, right? And like we are the first generation that like we didn't come into this, we inherited it. Like, right? And so that is so incredibly important to recognize, is that a part of it is not getting youth to care. It is supporting you to navigate how many things they are, like how much information they are receiving on a daily basis, and supporting them with the tools to be able to process and compartmentalize. Yeah. Because that is like so incredibly, I was just recently having amazing conversation with a group of youth from the city of Flint, right? And we were talking about mental health. And they were talking, these are like teenage youth, right? And they were talking about like growing up on social media and growing up in a time where like all of these things, where they're like receiving all of this information, but they're also navigating like adolescence, right? And they're navigating a rapidly shifting world, like a rapidly changing world, and they're navigating some of the pressures that their parents are facing, right? And so it's like, how do we call youth into these conversations and spaces, not simply with a banking model of education, which is to say that like I have to deposit and impart upon you all of the knowledge and the expansive wisdom but like truly creating space for them to bring their lived experiences to the table and say like, hey, like, this is the landscape I'm navigating. This is the lens through which I am perceiving these things. And then as youth begin to process their reality, right? The desensitization and the struggle. And it is hard, especially I was once a part of an organization called the Flint Public Health Youth Academy, right? And we talked about like microwave activism. Like our generation is the generation of microwave activism, where it's like, these social media trends just come and go and come and go and come and go. And there's always something to fight for. And it's like, today we're fighting for the turtles, and tomorrow we're fighting for Black Lives Matter, and the day after that we're fighting against ICE, and the day after that we're fighting. And like that, as a 15-year-old, is exhausting, right? And so sometimes calling youth into these conversations, I promise I'm bringing it to a close. It's like when a pastor says, all right, guys, this is my last point. But a lot of it is not just, right, like youth need this information because they're unknowledgeable and, you know, they just don't care and they just don't get it and it's just not sexy enough. Sometimes it's not making it sexy. It's creating space and opportunity for youth to sit with the reality of the world that they're inheriting, right? That, like, truly this is tough, right? And there are all of these things, and it's not your responsibility to attack it all.
Yep.
Right? It's not your responsibility to be in all places at once. It is not your job to fight every movement. It is not your responsibility to win. Because, like, even that, like the feeling discouraged because it's like, man, I was fighting for this thing and now it's delayed. Mm-hmm. I fought forever for this. And now with one swipe of a politician's hand, like, we are now delayed months and then years. And so, anywho, coming to a close, right? I think what you said was so good, right? That, like, there has to be space to process and to educate. There also has to be space for intergenerational education. And there also has to be space to slow down. It doesn't always have to be a TikTok. That is, like, the number one, and it makes me giggle, being in spaces with my elders. And they're like, oh my gosh, we need to reach youth. You know what we got to do? We need a TikTok. Create a TikTok account. We need to create a TikTok account, and that's gonna do it. When in reality, like, youth need thorough conversation. Yeah. They need long-winded resources. Like, we need more access to books. Like, real books.
And our generations are like it says, like, they're craving it. Like, they're I've talked to some people, like, I'm tired of, like, learning about this in, like, 3 seconds. Like, can we just slow down?
No, give me the 3-hour lecture. Yes, like give me, and not like a lecture, but give me engaging. Give me something that I can put my hands on, right? Like, some of it could even be, you know, because sometimes, you know, when adults or our elders, you know, in general, because, you know, I am an elder to someone, right? But sometimes when we are looking back trying to draw forward youth, right, we assume that it has to be a lecture, that it has to be this, that. Like, sometimes it's the hands-on work. Mm-hmm. It's like, what do you think we should do, right? Not like this is what exists, but, like, what doesn't exist that you think should, right? Like, what are we missing? And I think even that, like, drawing them into the process, drawing them in even to the confusion, right? That, like, and we haven't figured that out yet, actually. And that's where I left off. And that is how you said we can't afford to continue to reinvent this wheel.
No, we really can't.
And that's how we stop. We slow down that process by being able to bring youth into and this is where we are today. Like, this is where I leave off. This is where you pick up, or where we pick up together, and this is where we continue forward.
Yeah, it's passing that torch. Because, again, burnout is real.
Oh, my gosh.
So I think passing that torch when it's needed, like, hey, can you hold on to this torch for a little bit?
Yes, today.
But letting them know, like, you can pass this on when it's too hot.
Yes, like, remembering that, like, youth are not leaders of tomorrow. Like, that language is so, to me, dismissive, that, like, we have to support our leaders of tomorrow. We have to, because that reinforces to youth, right, that, like, I don't have power until.
Yep.
And then oftentimes, I think we talked about this maybe in last month's show, but the disconnect there, right, is that when a young person begins to believe that they don't have power until, oftentimes it's like their voting age. By the time they get to voting age, they don't have the tools, the resources, the know-how to be able to wield that tool wisely. Yeah. Right? And so they're starting behind the curve because they've been taught that, like, your power begins here. Mm-hmm. Right? That your leadership begins when you can take office, when you can sit in these seats, when you're able to lobby, when you're able to vote, when you're able to take. And it's like, actually, their power begins now. Yep. Right? And when you enforce that and support, I believe that people are intrinsically powerful, so it's not empowering them, but when you reveal to them the power that already exists, right, they're able to operate in that power much before they get to voting age, right? Yeah. That's how we build powerhouses. houses.
Yep, that's a big piece. And also, isn't it kind of like funny, like sometimes the environmental space falls into this trap of like, we need youth, but it's like almost like in a performative way.
Mm-hmm. We need them at the table.
But stay your spot.
But like quietly. Yeah, but like shh.
At the kids' table. And
yeah. Yeah, we need you at that table.
Invite them in.
Exactly. Like we need you in the sandbox. We need you over there. And when really sometimes adults need, or our elders need, to join the youth in the sandbox.
They need to go to the sandbox. See what's
you
going on there.
You need to go to the sandbox. Yes. That's going to be a hashtag. Go to the sandbox. Okay, moving right along. Getting off of my thank you for coming to my
No, that was great. Love.
Yes. So while the oil and gas industry receives significant attention, agriculture is also a major source of methane emissions. Given the significant role of immigrant workers in the agriculture sector, what innovative, culturally sensitive, and economically viable solutions can be implemented to reduce agricultural methane emissions without placing undue burden, again, back on those frontline communities who are disproportionately impacted to begin with? Yeah,
that's a super important question. And I do want to start by saying, you're right. Agriculture is a major source of methane, and a lot of the trends from environmental groups is to focus on oil and gas. And I'll have to say, I'm not an expert in agriculture, but because my work does primarily focus on oil and gas, so I fall under that kind of world. But it did make me kind of question, okay, what can we do in this space? And I know we work really closely with allied organizations. So we work with the Farm Worker Justice, and we bring them in when it comes to issues like this, just because since we're not the experts, we want to bring those experts in. So they helped us with some OSHA proposed ruling.
What is OSHA?
The Occupational Safety. I can't remember what H is.
That's so real. I'm just curious.
Agency.
Yes, agency of some sort. Yes, okay. You guys look that up. What's OSHA?
Yeah, but OSHA, they had a proposed rule. They basically do a lot of workplace safety. So they had a proposed rule for indoor and outdoor workplaces to finally have protections for when it gets too hot, which sounds really crazy. What do you mean? Once it gets too hot, they can put in protections for outdoor workers to have shading, to have water, those basic needs. So we brought in Farm Worker Justice during that time to kind of understand that space. And some of those pieces that kept coming up that I think still can be a place into the methane world is first, regenerative agriculture. I think that's a huge one. Practices like rotational grazing, cover crop, composting, and better manure management can cut methane. It's kind of funny when I talk to friends, I'm going to go speak about methane. They're like cow farts? Because it is a big piece. But I think the regenerative agriculture is a huge one, and reminding people that these aren't new ideas. A lot of regenerative agriculture stems from indigenous practices.
I was going to say that.
So I think that's a really big, important one. And another one is focusing in on more locally and culturally rooted food systems. So right now our food systems are like a lot of things in the U.S. It's ran by capitalism. So there's these
corporate.
Very corporate, very monopolized. And with that, there's these huge carbon footprints coming out of these facilities. So by strengthening local farmer markets, co-ops, community agriculture, back in Salt Lake, there's something called Wasatch Community Gardens, where there's gardens throughout the community where you can go pick up your agriculture there. You can just go and pick up a pepper if you need one. More of that localized food sources to cut down on the need to get food from other places.
Yeah, the mass production.
Yeah, and even transporting that. Isn't it crazy that we're shipping things that don't grow in our area from super far away just for a meal? Just to have certain things in certain times. So rethinking a lot of that and seeing what locally can grow, I think is a really big piece. And now the other one, let's talk about diet, but very carefully, because this one always gets brought up in the Latino community. People always say why don't you go vegan? Why don't you go vegetarian? A lot of our cultural foods aren't they're meat based,
and that's important.
And I think it's important to talk about kind of the vegan and vegetarian is opening up more options rather than saying no. So I think that's a really big conversation that always gets brought up with agriculture is, trying to find more plant-based foods that are culturally appropriate, and also just going back to some of our cultural foods and seeing what already is vegan and vegetarian. My mom makes these amazing potato tacos, which I love. We grew up with that. I didn't know that was a vegan thing. It's corn and potatoes.
Yeah.
So those are big pieces. And then another big piece that I really want to center is centering workers and holding corporations accountable. A lot of these policies will and have targeted small farms and small workers. And as we talked, those aren't necessarily the people who are to blame with the agricultural sector. It's these big monopolies.
Yeah.
This conversation actually comes up a lot in Utah right now. The Great Salt Lake is drying up, if you know of our lake. And a big source of that is agriculture. So people are pointing fingers at the agriculture sector saying, you guys need to stop using water. But in a lot of cases, it's those small farms and the small community people that are getting that blame instead of these
the mass productions.
Yeah. So really focusing in those policies on those mass productions is really key in this agricultural space.
Yeah, I think that's so good, and I think it's so. What I appreciate is discussing and delving into some of the complexities of these issues, right? Because also we have to be careful of one size fits all approaches to any solution, right? Anything in excess is going to cause havoc, right? Is unhealthy. Anything in excess is unhealthy. And so I think it's important, when we're discussing these issues, that's why it's important that it doesn't happen in a 6-second TikTok, because it's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Go vegan.
Right? just go vegan. Just switch up. And again, we recently had this conversation on an episode where we were talking about diet, right? And the connections between diet and environmental health and health outcomes, again, specifically in marginalized communities. And when we were having that discussion, we had to acknowledge the fact, right, that food is cultural and so deeply connected to the cultural identity, oftentimes, of Black and brown communities, right? So when you tell me just stop eating pork in a Latino community where pork is such a culturally important, there are so many recipes, right? Or when you say I know I've experienced this often in my communities or even my home, right? When you say use less salt, it's no, grandma's recipe calls for, or use less sugar. No, because on Thanksgiving we have sweet potato pie, we have pound cake, we have no, we can't just cut these things out. This is generations of recipes. These are generations of, and these things are, it's not just food, right? It's so when we're having these conversations, right, also about these implications, it's not. That is why there is no sweeping solution, right? This is why folks spend hours and hours advocating for very particular policy items, right? This is why it is important that there is no delay, because these issues are interconnected, right? And the way that, a solution falls on paper and the way that it is actually implicated in a community, and even further, the way that it is implicated in a home, right? The way that it falls in access to, because you say just go vegan in a food desert. You say just go vegan when I'm struggling to feed my family. So it's just go vegan has an undertone of privilege that if you are unaware of the realities faced by communities existing at the margin, right? You say just use less water. Right? When it's
just this move.
just move, right? Like there are these sweeping generalizations, these sweeping solutions. And this is why, again, it's so incredibly important to have those who are most closely positioned to a struggle, to an issue, to a barrier, to an obstacle, equally positioned, right, in same proximity to the decision-making spaces where solutions are being proposed, right? Because folks in those communities can tell you, hey, just going vegan doesn't make sense for us, right?
And here's why. Here's what you need help with.
Exactly. And here are the options. Here's the education that's necessary, right? Here's the cultural context that you wouldn't understand. And it's like, okay for you to not understand it. That's one thing, right? Ignorance is one thing, but a lack of willingness to address the gaps in these systems and solutions that are caused by your ignorance, that is where this fallout comes from, right? It's your active, it is the choice of many decision makers or folks in places with certain types of power and political influence. It is like the active decision that they make to ignore or be unaware. Yeah. Like, that's not ignorance. That is abuse of power. Like, if we're just gonna call a spade, okay?
And bringing it back to like the methane, like the EPA ruling, like that's why it irked me so bad that they put the public comment after. It's like,
because that's like step number one. Because how do you accept public comment after making a decision that directly conflicts with what the public has expressed a desire for? Like it's like, this is your space to complain. Like this is your space to tell me no to what we've already decided. Yes.
Yep. And in that, I think the hearing was like a week ago. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it was like over 58 people came out and spoke, and they opposed it. I think only like 4 or 5, so like 90%, I want to say, said, no, don't do this. And the rest were like, okay. So,
but it was already done.
That just shows you like the abuse of power.
Yeah.
And that's where environmental injustices happen, is when you don't listen to the frontline communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving right along, communities of color and low-income communities, as you said, are often located near sources of methane pollution, effectively creating sacrifice zones, so to speak. So how can communities become resilience hubs that not only monitor and mitigate methane emissions, but also actively participate in developing and benefiting from clean energy solutions? So again, positioning those communities who are most closely affected more closely to the solutions.
Yeah, definitely. And this is kind of like goes beyond just methane. I think just in general for a lot of these sacrifice zones, that we see the common like pieces that could help. I think monitoring and data is a huge first one. As many of you might be like aware, like when administrations change, they bring in their own people for these different agencies. And what we saw with the EPA when the Trump administration came in was they stripped and got rid of a lot of these maps and a lot of this data that we had with the EPA. It just disappeared overnight. Thankfully, lots of organizations came in. They copied what they could. They archived as much as possible. But I think getting more community-led data and gathering that data and monitoring is going to be really crucial. Whether this is through nonprofits, through just communities who want to come together and be able to monitor that data, I think it's really important. We did something like this back in Salt Lake where the transit system they're like, we have electric buses that are going from east to west, which I described like the disparities in those communities. Why don't we track the air quality from both sides? So a local nonprofit has been monitoring the disparities between those two neighborhoods. And that data is not susceptible to, okay, the EPA is changing, so now our data's gone.
There's a continuity.
So I think that's a really important part. And universities, like community, more community-based, like local institutions can really help out with that monitoring and data gathering. Another one is the energy that we need itself. So there's a big there's a big push for and not care for the methane pieces because we need energy independence. We keep hearing this, right? And I think we need to reposition ourselves and really talk about what's actually needed, which is energy democracy. I love something that was coined to me by a coworker at HEAL. His name's Turner Bin, but he told me that he's like, energy democracy is where we need to lead to. And I was like,
what does that mean? Yeah. Yes, tell us more.
Which is like, it's localizing the energy. So we don't have to rely, again, on a monopoly to provide our energy.
Yeah.
Again, on this monopoly who doesn't care that methane is coming out. This is looking at making microgrids, allowing for solar projects like community solar to be plugged into a community so people can get their energy from a local source. So that when something like what happens in Texas or in other states where if the grid falls, the grid falls. That is, all communities are blacked out. So we want to make sure that we have that localized energy sources that is community-led.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And again, I appreciate and I always want to emphasize to our listeners the through line that exists between like conversations that we're having with experts like yourself, right? And something that so consistently comes up and thus is incredibly important is access to community-led data and research, right? Opportunity for community to take a leading role and not just as like data sets, data points on someone else's grid, right?
The survey.
Yes, like please fill out this survey for $25, right? And then they collect the data and take it somewhere and, you know, publish it somewhere and then, you know, don't report back to the communities from which they've collected the data so that those communities can then use the data collected from them to inform solutions in their communities, right? It's so incredibly important to have community-led data collection that belongs to the community. In which it was taken from, right? It's so incredibly important for so many reasons. I mean, like you spoke to, so that there is continuity, right? So it is something that they own that cannot be taken from them, that cannot be erased by a change in administration, right? Things that are completely independent, democratic, like to bring the autonomy, but also, again, going back to pride and buy-in and desensitization, and which we haven't touched on yet, the distrust in these federal industrialized, capitalistic organizations who come in. It creates, having community-led data sources creates an opportunity for a community to speak and create for itself, right? And create opportunity for that community to say, like, we made this. We came to this conclusion from our findings. So then there's also, because there is a sense, right, realistically, in communities that have been historically disenfranchised and historically lied to blatantly. I was trying to think of a more like, you know, calm, colorful way to say it, but like lied to, right? Communities that who have been blatantly lied to by data and statistics, like communities of whom data and statistics have often spoken wrongly about because of systemic racism, right? It does something in those communities. It increases their confidence in what these data and statistics say, right? Because it is one thing for data from the Environmental Protection Agency reports that fill in the blank than it is to say data from a trusted community source reports that this is going on in our community. Like it truly, and again, that goes back to the cultural awareness. Right, the community level awareness to know that we were joking around on a different episode that, like, you know, some folks might just trust grandma a little better than your doctorate. Like, you know, some folks don't care so much about your degrees or, you know, your accreditations or all of your accomplishments and your resume. They want to hear from pastor. You know, they want to hear from whomever that trusted community source is. And sometimes the the structures of a formal agency they just don't provide that same comfort. Like there's just, especially if these are organizations that don't operate at the grassroots level within these communities. So that's so incredibly important. And just like that, we've already come to the end of another episode. Right? That was like snap. And as fast as a lightning bolt.
It's because I'm a comms major. We love to yap.
Yes, and I'm not a comms major, but I do love to yap. I love a good yapping session, okay? So just like that, we've come to the end of another episode of The Green Agenda. And per usual, we always like to end with a call to action. I tell the audience, if you haven't heard anything, which I hope you were listening to everything, because Meisei gave us a lesson today, all right? What do you think is the most immediate top strategy that listeners could implement today to protect their communities from methane pollution?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely want to leave with some energy, because I know it can be doom and gloom a little bit. And I know how I talked about like the public comment period not being very fair. I still think individuals should submit a public comment. And the reason why is we want to leave kind of like a record. Yeah, leave that record. So when people are litigating it, when people are challenged in courts, we have that to say, look how many people said no to this. Mm-hmm. So definitely still submit those public comments. I think it's also important when submitting those comments to know that once the EPA, like we talked about this back and forth, once the EPA is back with its mission, protecting people and its environment, they can reinstate that again. So really gives us a lot of leverage. Another thing is I think it's really important for you to reach out to your elected officials, whether this is on, the federal level all the way down to like city council members, and just ask them what are they doing in this methane world. In a lot of cases, those local officials might have a little more power to say, oh, we should regulate this here, especially right now with what's going on federally. We don't have that much support right now federally to do these big like rulings or big laws to kind of lower methane emissions. Mm-hmm. So I really do think locally is the way to go. Really important right now. So reach out to your city council, your state senators and reps on the state level.
Pull up to their offices.
Yeah, it's way easier. Just go up to the council.
Knock on the door.
Find the Instagram. They usually put their info on there, and just that simple question of what's being done, I think is really important. Or let them know about this delay, saying, hey, did you see that this delay is going on? Because in many cases they have a lot of things going on. Mm-hmm. So letting them know that this is going on and what solutions can happen on a local level is really important right now. So I think those two things are really big. And we have some resources on our website at greenlatinos.org that can help you share your story regarding methane, because that's also really important to share your story of how this is impacting you, as well as how to connect with your local officials. So definitely visit our website for some help.
And what's your website?
greenlatinos.org.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. I think, again, the reminder that, like, no matter what it is, put your hands to something. Yeah. Right? Reiterating that, like, it is nobody's individual responsibility to, like, put the world on their backs and, like, carry it like Superman. Every issue may not be your forte. I really appreciated earlier in this conversation, I forgot to acknowledge it. I really appreciated that you said, like, that's not my area of expertise, right? Because we live in an age where people feel the need to pretend to know everything. Like, they feel the need to defend every issue as if, like, this is my major, this was my dissertation, I'm extremely clear, and then come to find out all they watched was that 6-second TikTok video. Okay, you have a TikTok university degree. Okay, and so I think it's so incredibly important to find your lane. Find your lane. Find, where the story, the purpose, the issue, which hits closely to home. Like, we started with your story, your journey here, which was closely interconnected with your experiences and what you saw and what you've been exposed to. It's incredibly important for folks to find what is that avenue, like, what is that thing that makes your brain light up and all of your synapses fire at the same time, right? And figure out a way to address that issue. And if that issue just so happens to be methane pollution, all right, finding a way to get involved locally. There is so much a disillusionment right now simply because of what is going on at the federal level. And I think a part of that is because of misinformation that has led the public to believe that the federal level of government is the only level, or like the president is the only political figure with power, right? That like simply if he is doing all of these things, then that means that our government will fail, you know, and it means all of these different things. It's incredibly important that folks understand the power of our local municipalities and institutions. It's incredibly important that people put their hands to something and simply are not discouraged by the fact of the overwhelming amount of information that is coming in on an ongoing basis. So thank you so much, Meisei, for joining us here today. Thank you to our audience for coming for another episode of The Green Agenda. Again, my name is Kayla Shannon, your host, and I'll see you next month. Bye.